Welcome to Circle of Friends. You've found a place to belong here with us for years. We are revamping a little bit of what we're doing, and for the next couple of weeks, we are going to be bringing you samples of our new podcast. So every day when you listen in at your normal spot where you're used to hearing us, you're going to hear a sample of what you can find on Spotify, Anchor, Apple, and Google podcast systems. You would go in, you're going to go to those sites, you're going to Google Open the Word, and you're going to find Open the Word with Circle of Friends. What we have there is Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. We have different things coming out on each of those 3 days. On Fridays, you will get a sample of our archives that have been put together in a little bit different format just to fit the podcast type structure. On Mondays, you're going to get a bit of what you've experienced for years, but they're going to be new things, new interviews, new things that we've recorded about resources and books or people that are living the Christian faith out in real life. You're going to find those kinds of things on Mondays. Wednesdays is a discipleship series that start with why we can trust God's Word. Wednesdays set of podcasts are called Faith Foundations, and I host those. But I go through a lot of information that sometimes we miss in Sunday school. And so hopefully this has kind of spiked your curiosity just a little bit, and you'll search us out on some of those podcast forums. Take a listen. We're going to put together some samples this week and for the next couple weeks to give you guys an idea of what we've got new on the scene with Circle of Friends. Here you go. Take a listen.
Thanks for joining us today in Open the Word with Circle of Friends. I'm Missy, and my guest today is Becca Studer. Becca, thanks for coming back.
Thank you.
Well, you know, we heard in the earlier podcast your story, really a very poignant, very difficult story of how as an adult, your older brother committed suicide, and you went through that as a young wife out on your own, and some of those difficulties and things that you went through we've talked about, but that's not all of your story, and that's one of the reasons why we've sort of split up the podcast a little bit, is to kind of help people absorb that and, process through that. The thing that I think is so neat about God is that He lays a foundation in our lives for the things that are to come. And if we yield ourselves to Him, we can be prepared for whatever is to come. If we, by laying a foundation of being in the Word, of knowing Him, of following Him, of trusting Him, of being obedient to Him, we lay a foundation of preparation. And I think that's your story. I think that's part of your story, at least. As you told us about growing up in a family that you did that loved the Lord, that was laying a foundation for the storms of your life, would you say?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Absolutely, yeah. As I mentioned earlier, I felt like I had this indestructible family growing up. And I guess I felt like maybe in my mind, if you have a Christ-centered home and as strong of a one, an active Christian family that I had, that there's no way that it can be torn apart. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to be gloom and doom here, saying that, I don't want to be gloom and doom here. But growing up, I thought I had this indestructible family, nothing to fear with that my family would always stick together and they would always be together. And that has not been the case, unfortunately. 2006, Ryan took his life. And then fast forward 7 years later, this was in 2013, my dad, I got an unexpected knock on my door. And my dad came over to my house. I didn't know he was coming. And he sat down on my couch and looked at me dead in the eye and said, "I'm leaving your mom." Now, this was the second crisis in my life. I had no warning whatsoever. Again, this was, even with Ryan's, we had no warning with that. That was out of the blue. This is the second storm, completely out of the blue. Now, let me hit pause for a second, tell you about my relationship with my dad, because if you understand more about my dad and I, then you realize how traumatic, how traumatic it was for me. So growing up, my dad and I was closer with my dad than I was my mom. Not that my mom and I weren't. It's just my dad and I had that special, I don't know. I was daddy's little girl, daddy's little princess. And my dad was up on a pedestal. In fact, and this is where kind of God put me in check eventually, I think I had him on a higher pedestal than the Lord, which is, whoa, like let's correct that a little bit. Okay, I didn't realize that until a little bit later on, but he was up there and he was my number one hero. We had a great relationship. So when he came over to my house and told me that day, and I was getting ready to go out of town, and like I said, it was completely out of the blue, and he looked at me in the eye, and I thought, I could tell by the look on his face that he wasn't joking, and he wasn't the jokes, he's not the type of parent, he's not going to say that unless he means it. I knew he wasn't joking, but again, I felt, if you've ever experienced a crisis, what do you feel like during that time? I felt like I was dreaming. I thought what did you just say to me? Are you kidding me right now? And I was getting ready to go out of town, and I just felt desperate for, I don't know if I felt desperate for the Lord, desperate for, I felt like maybe I was drowning a little bit. I just was trying to grab a hold of, I needed something stable to grab a hold of, physically, emotionally. And so anyway, to be honest, the rest of the day is kind of a blur. I ended up carrying through with my plans for that day and ended up going out of town, which was actually a great thing because I ended up being around a lot of other Christian women that weekend that I needed. But, oh my goodness, was it a blow to me. And this solid, indestructible family that I had growing up, up until I was 26 when Ryan died, it was falling apart. I literally felt like it was just disintegrating, like just crumbled. I'd picture, I don't know, just stone or rock, and it's just crumbling to pieces. And I thought, what is going on? Why is this happening? Why is this happening? And it was just extremely disappointing, extremely disappointing. So, I've already mentioned kind of my takeaways that I had with Ryan and the why questions, and all of that kind of resurfaced. And honestly, with my parents' divorce, I had more answers than I did with Ryan's passing, but I didn't really want to know them. And this is this is different than when Ryan passed. But the reason I didn't want to know them, I was it was kind of I wanted to know them, but I wanted to be careful at how much I knew. So I really had to juggle personally what my boundaries were there. How much information is good? How much information is too much information? And the reason I had to juggle that was because, if someone wrongs you, or maybe you've gone through divorce in your family and you want to know, well, why? Why did this person leave? Or why did so-and-so divorce so-and-so? And you get the answers to those. Well, he did this, or she did that, or he said this, and they had a fight and it was about this. Well, what does that do to our heart?
Right.
We get angry at them, probably, if they were, if there was infidelity or whatever the case may be. But when that truth evolves, we have to be really careful how much we know, how much we want to know. Because in our hearts, well, we want to know because maybe we want to feel justified in our hurt. But what's that ultimately going to do to our heart? We don't want to hate other people. We don't want to create more division in our family and other relationships. So that's really, really tricky. And ultimately, the easy answer for me was, Lord, I want to know, but guide me with that and show me how to set those boundaries. I still want to have a continued love for my mom. I still want to have a continued love for my dad.
Right. And you're the only child right in the middle.
Exactly. Which is another part that stunk with this whole thing, because I didn't have anybody else to go to.
Yeah.
I mean, I have my husband, bless his heart, but Ryan was gone, and now, I remember even feeling angry about that. Not necessarily angry with the Lord about it, but gosh darn it. Why am I getting stuck dealing with this?
Right.
With my parents, and even thought, well, if Ryan were around, how would he have dealt with it? Or, would we have been able to talk about it sibling to sibling? And, but again, that was just, I was alone. I was alone with that. And so I had to, I really did it. I got to a point where I didn't want to know the details about my parents' divorce. There were some things that my mom shared with me. There were some things where I had to say, I don't want to know. And she had to find, almost another sounding board to go to. Because ultimately, because of remember, my relationship with my dad, he was my number one hero. I had him on a pedestal. I didn't want to hate him. I didn't want to get to a point where I knew he did this and I knew he did that, or I knew, my mom did this or my mom did that, and I didn't want Satan to have that leverage on me. I didn't want him to just tear me down knowing that information. So there were some things that I found out, and there were some things where I just had to draw the line. And I'll tell you, my husband really stepped in that way. And there were some things I think that he knew that he didn't share with me, and I told him not to share with me. And I think that's okay, because I was protecting my heart.
Yeah. And it seems to me, as you're describing that there is wisdom in that. I mean, sometimes as a child of divorce, there are things that, are put on you, and even too young, there are things that that you don't want to know. But I see this as wisdom, because you weren't in denial. You were simply trusting that God would take care of it, because you wanted to continue to honor your mom and dad.
Right.
Even though you could do nothing about the split, the breakup, the divorce, you wanted to love them and honor them individually. So I see that as wisdom. And again, the foundation has been laid through Ryan and processing through his suicide, the why questions. You've already learned to say, God, I don't know why, and I have to rest in you and believe that one day you'll reveal it, but now is not the time. So
Absolutely.
You're doing this again. I mean, in this situation, once again, you're saying, God, I trust you, because it sure doesn't make sense to me, and it's not what I want, but I'm also helpless to do anything about it. So I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, and I think you're right. There's nothing wrong with protecting yourself, as long as you're not in denial, and saying, oh, you know what I mean, that causes other problems.
Right, right.
But this sounds like a wise thing to do. And every case is so individual.
It is.
It's so different. Every situation is so different. People are different. The circumstances are different. Relationships are different. So it sounds to me like God really led you through this.
He did.
Crazy time.
And, I think it comes down to where I wanted my heart to be. I still wanted to have, deep down, even though I was, yes, I went through an angry stage with my dad, and I'll, maybe get into in the future of how our relationship has been since then. But I didn't want to hate him. He was my hero. I wanted to still have this unconditional love for him. God knew that.
Yeah.
God knew that. And so he guided me in, what to know, what to divulge to me, what not to, and to judge that. And I really he gave me the strength to be bold enough, even with my relationship with my mom, of saying, I don't want to know this. And, which gets tricky, because I wanted to be able to be there for her.
Yes.
I wanted to be able to empathize with her
Yeah.
of what she was going through. But that at the same time, well, if this is too much information, if this is going to go down a path of me hating my dad, I don't want to go down that road, you know? And we really have to be careful because just the enemy can really use that against us in a powerful way.
So I'm curious, your relationship with your mom, you managed to survive and navigate those waters, and it remained intact, correct?
It did.
Which is awesome. I think that's one of the things that really we're talking about, blessings that God brings through trials and circumstances. Do you feel like you were closer to your mom than you'd been before? You mentioned you were so close to your dad and maybe not as close to your mom.
Yes. You know, my relationship with my mom is still growing closer and evolving. That's still a work in progress.
And that's a blessing.
It is.
It is. It so is. And again, you know, the mother-daughter, parent-child kind of situation, it's ever evolving, the relationship, because as a child, you have one kind of relationship, and then as a young adult, and then, you know, the older you get and the older your parents get, it just continues to change just naturally. And so when you have these other things that are added in as well, it can be really tricky. I love that you bring up that you just ask God for guidance in that. I think that's the best thing for all of us to do as we go through our life circumstances. Because again, each situation is different, and we don't have the wisdom maybe even to see, especially in crisis, how do you even see the next step, let alone the future? I see in your story how God guided you and gave you wisdom, and that's a beautiful picture for me.
I'm glad. I can't, I won't take credit for any of this. Definitely going through what I did with Ryan helped, I think, prepare me and trust him even more, because he got me through. He was faithful in dealing with Ryan. But again, it was still that, it was still grieving the loss of that indestructible family that I never in my wildest dreams, if someone would have told me 15 plus years ago that, you know, your family would fall apart, and really, you know, my dad is still living and breathing, but really it's just my mom and I would have laughed in their face.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have even.
Yeah, the scripture that tells us that Satan is a roaring lion, walking about seeking whom he may devour, is so real and so true. And when it hits you out of the blue, it is devastating. The message, though, and I know this is your message, it's been so in my life as well, that God can take the worst of circumstances and make good come from them.
Yes.
He didn't want this. This is not how he planned things.
Right.
But he is the kind of God who can take this mess and make good come from it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
What are some of the good things that have come from that situation?
Well, my relationship with my mom, I think, is growing closer. I am learning to forgive much easier than I have in the past. And the reason I bring that up is, as my dad, you know, left, their divorce, it took a while for their divorce to become final, but they were separated for many years. And during that separation, the enemy really got a hold of my dad and tried to kill and destroy him. And I won't get into the details, but he just was making a lot of poor decisions, and
was it like a spiral?
It was a downward spiral. Yeah. And I went through several years, probably 3 to 5 years, of dealing with some intense spiritual warfare. Because my dad was feeling guilty and feeling convicted of his mistakes, and he needed to vent. He needed to unleash it on somebody, and he did that with my mom and I. And so I received, and this probably went on for maybe 3-4 years. And it's a wonder, looking back, it's a wonder how God kept me alive during this, because it was so, I've just never experienced spiritual warfare, let alone to this degree. But for a few years, my dad was just very attackful, and he was really the enemy was just transforming him into a selfish man, the opposite of what I knew, like I said, he was my hero and just very well respected, well loved. And he just was making me feel, he was very attackful. And so I received a lot of emails and texts during those few years, and he was just beating me down. And, but you know what? I guess God gave me enough maturity in my relationship with him that I knew better than to think, this is really my dad, or is this the enemy? And I was able to make that separation.
That's awesome.
It is really cool. I mean, like I said, I don't take credit for that. The Lord helped me with that. But I had enough confidence, and this is who my dad is. This is who raised me.
Yeah.
And this guy who is, communicating with me is not the dad that I know. And so I knew he is under, Satan is having a heyday with him, and I was just able to make that separation. Now, it didn't make things easier because words hurt. And whether it's through email or text, if someone is, unleashing their anger and frustration at you, it hurts and it still tears you down.
Well, and as you said, your view of him in being on a pedestal, your relationship that was so close suddenly is not anything like that.
No.
How painful, and what a betrayal almost in some
Yes,
ways
exactly.
it was for you.
Yes, that's a great word.
Yeah.
And you know what? Just disappointment. Like I said, I was Daddy's little girl, and Dad, why I'm just over here minding my own business. Why are you being this way to me?
Yeah.
Blaming me for things that I had nothing to do with. So that forgiving, in the previous, in the past, I've said forgiving what you can't forget.
Yeah.
That was really challenging. That was so hard. Because again, words hurt, and we want to stick it to people, and we don't want them to forget that they hurt us. But again, I knew, and the Lord knows how my heart was feeling during that time. And that's when, during that time, what's our first reaction when someone takes a jab at us?
Gonna punch back, right?
That's right, and one of the blessings that came out of that is the Lord told me to keep quiet. He told me not to say a word back. And that's a struggle, because our first instinct is, you're saying I did this? Well, you did that. And, to take that jab right back to him. But he told me to stay silent. And he told me to talk to him, the Lord, about it instead. And so I don't know how long this went on for. It seems like it went on for months, but there was a period of time where I was really grieving the loss of my dad. It was a different type of grief.
The relationship that really...
The relationship that I had on a pedestal, right? He was still living and breathing, unlike Ryan, but I had to... my dad, I said I had my dad on a pedestal. Well, he ended up falling and kind of coming down. And the Lord, who was underneath my dad, ended up going up, which is okay. The Lord wants us to be at, he wants him to be at the top of our pedestal. So that's during that period of time, he really put me in check and said, listen, there was a period of time where I was just in bed, and I was just in a fetal position, and I was grieving, and I was a mess. And just very, very depressed. And that is the period of time where I feel like the Lord said, listen, I am sorry. I know that I know the amount of love you have for your dad, respect, admiration, and those are kind of diminishing and falling away. But let me tell you about me. I am your Heavenly Father, and I will never leave you, and I will never disappoint you. And so that's when I realized as much of love and respect and admiration that I have for my dad, and still do to a certain degree, that the Lord is way above that. And he is my number one hero.
He's a good, good father, even when our earthly fathers fail us, and they will, right? No parent is perfect. And when they fall that far, for the Lord to remind you of who he was, I think that's encouraging for all of us who may come from backgrounds where maybe they weren't raised in a good Christian home. Maybe they didn't have a dad who loved them, or maybe they have a similar story to yours where their dad or their mom or someone has failed them utterly. God can be everything and is everything we need.
Right.
And will show himself faithful to us. So.
Right. Yeah, I would be careful to, for listeners, who's at the top of your pedestal, and sit back and reflect. Are they higher up than God is in your life? You may need to think about that and put that in check.
Becca, thank you so much for sharing this most difficult part of your journey and story with us. I know you, so I know there's more to this story. Listeners, as you've listened to the storms that have hit Becca's life, there's a further storm, and we don't have time today in this podcast to talk about it, but we're going to go there, and we're going to talk about that, because God has been faithful through all of it, and that's the amazing thing. Today, as you talked about forgiving when you can't forget, it made me think of a passage of Scripture that has I've really clung to, and that's in 1 Peter chapter 2. And it's talking about Jesus, and it says, "He committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth." And this verse 23 is the one I was thinking of. "When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly." And I feel like that's your story. You submitted and yielded yourself. You entrusted yourself to God, who judges justly and who's forgiven us. And I think that's a beautiful picture. And as I said, there's more to the story. So you're coming back, right?
That's right.
Okay, because I can't tell that part of the story.
Yes.
And I am so appreciative of it. I feel like it's a hard story in many ways, but it's also a beautiful story and one filled with hope. So listeners, we hope you join us on the next podcast here at Open the Word with Circle of Friends.
Thanks for listening today. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. We'd love to hear from you, so find us on Facebook and Instagram at Open the Word Podcast, or send us an email to openthewordpodcast@gmail.com.
Is it time for you to plan a day trip with your peeps? Come and stay a while at Shia Market in Berlin. There is something for everyone, no matter what your taste or style may be. Visit the Village Gift Barn for your custom floral arrangements and timeless accessories for your home. Stroll upstairs to Shia's Style Boutique for your perfect outfit. Everything from accessories to shoes. Be inspired at country gatherings with decor from modern farmhouse to transitional design. Then meander through the gardens for a large selection of houseplants. And last but not least, order your perfect cup of brew at the Buggy Brew Coffee Company. End your day by gathering to relax in our courtyard. You will leave feeling connected and refreshed.
Step back in time with a stay at one of the oldest buildings in historic Berlin, Ohio, the Worthman House. This charming building has a rich history with origins dating back to as early as the mid-1800s. The newly restored 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom suite has hardwood floors and gorgeous chestnut trim throughout. It is also outfitted with locally made Amish furniture. It can sleep 6 and offers a beautiful panoramic view of Berlin's Main Street. Its location in the heart of Berlin is an ideal spot for walking to various restaurants and shops. Book your stay at the Worthman House through VRBO.